All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Design, Build, Hunt podcast. We've got an exciting one for you guys today. We've got Sam Billhorn, the founder of Whitetail Partners, but then we've also got our very first client guest on the Design, Build, Hunt podcast, Jordan Abruzzo from Wisconsin. He has worked with Sam. And so, Jordan, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate this.
Yeah, glad you could jump on. Very, very excited to get your take on this. Very grateful that you would take the time to join us today. Sam, how about yourself? I know you've been busy with a couple of things, but how are you doing?
Yeah, doing great. Still rolling with a few consults. A lot of land management this time of year. Trying to get to my own property and do some things, and following up and working with people like Jordan as they're doing the same.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, Jordan, I've got to start with you. I mean, obviously, all of the questions today are going to be targeting you, asking about your time hunting, your land, your experience working with Whitetail Partners, your experience with the follow-up. I think that's one of the areas where we want to make sure that we are exceeding expectations every single time with our follow-up services. So, Jordan, just to kick it off, tell us about how you got into deer hunting.
So it started around 16 years ago, and I wish I had more of an exciting and interesting story to tell you. But my brother and I would actually just watch hunting shows every Saturday morning. And we lived right behind a nice block of timber, and we'd always see deer and kind of got interested that way. And luckily for us, we actually had a neighbor that had about 7 acres worth of timber. And unfortunately, out of the 7, we were only able to hunt probably about 3 acres worth. So we ended up asking our neighbor to hunt, and we kind of just self-taught our way through. You know, we didn't have anybody to really show us how to shoot a bow. So we ended up just watching a bunch of shows and kind of got into that way and made a lot of mistakes throughout the way. And that's pretty much how we got started. It was a slow start for us, but we quickly escalated into becoming a better hunter, years down the road. So that was
right,
kind of our first part into the hunting.
Yeah, those lessons that you learn by making mistakes, those stick with you way more deeply than the lessons that maybe someone told you and you're just like, oh, okay, I'll do it that way. I'm curious what it was like starting hunting with a smaller property. You said you only had a couple of acres that you could really hunt. What was that like for you? How much success did you experience?
So it's a good question. Our success really only happened within a couple weeks of the year, or pretty much the rut. They were not bedding down on the timber. They were just kind of passing through. We would always get the bucks kind of either chasing or just looking around. It was not a good block of timber to really be hunting in unless you're sitting there every single day, didn't care about the wind, just waited for something to walk by. So not the type of hunting I would like to do, especially nowadays, but I just took it and ran with it. And we were successful, but after the rut, it's like, yeah, your season was over.
Yeah. I'm curious then. So obviously things have changed since those days when you were hunting that small woodlot. Tell us about your journey from being a deer hunter in a small woodlot to now a habitat manager, right? Like there's a lot that happens in between. So I'm curious about your process there.
Yeah. So after hunting that one little lot of land, we ended up getting, we had a friend out by Iowa that actually had 100 acres of property. Half of it was ag land, the other half was timber, very hilly, very tough to get into. So they actually had a lot of deer on that property back in the day. And then either some type of disease came through or hunting pressure, but it ended up taking a lot of the deer out. But then at that point, we were hunting every single weekend out there, 3 hour drive. Kind of got a little tired of doing that. And then eventually some other people got to hunt that property. So it was like hunting public property on a private property. And so at that point, getting kind of frustrated because you're dealing with other people, you're dealing with a less of a deer herd. We eventually, as I got older, I was like, I want my own land. So my wife and I kind of been planning on this to move into Wisconsin. So we came from Illinois, and we ended up buying last September about 35 acres. And so finally, I have no hunting pressure except for my brother and I, and a couple of neighbors. So it's been a journey. We are thankful to be able to buy a 35-acre property, but I got tired of hunting with too many people. So
Yeah, a lot of those private parcels that where people are open to giving permission to hunting on them, they can oftentimes have more pressure on them than the local public land down the street. Like you might have an easier time sometimes getting away from the crowds if you just go hunt the public land rather than trying to hunt Farmer Joe's place. So all right,
exactly.
we're going to get now into the portion where we're talking about your land, some of the pain points you experienced. Sam, this is where you're going to come in because you know things about Jordan and his experience and his land and the process with the design. And so, feel free to jump in here, Sam, and override me with any questions, follow-ups that you may have. You know all the important features because you've been here with Jordan since day one. So, Jordan, you mentioned, though, that you've got that 35 acres, which is, I think, a fantastic size, not only for you and you said your brother to hunt, but for us to discuss on the show, because that's something that if guys put their mind to it and are really committed to buying their own chunk of ground, that's something that's within reach for a lot of people. And even if it doesn't feel within reach, it really, really is if you prioritize it, right? Like if you shape things, move things around within your life to prioritize it. And, maybe buy a piece that's not in the area you wanted, but it ends up being, it's 35 acres that I could get a hold of. So tell us about your land and maybe, I don't think you've owned it terribly long, but maybe some of the pain points. When you first looked at it, you thought, I want this to be my whitetail parcel. And then you realize kind of quickly, like, I might need some help on this.
Yep. And so let me just start off with saying that when I was looking for a house, it took us 7-8 months to find something that we could work with. And when I say that, my house had to have good bones. That was on more of my wife's side. And then from my side, I wanted timber. I wanted to have some fields. But what was important is I wanted to have a lot of connecting timber to my property. I've seen properties where it was just, all right, you have a 15-acre lot and it wasn't really connecting to any other timber. So I knew that was going to be very difficult. But when I walked this property, and just let me interject here. The one thing with this property, it's one of the oldest prairie restorations in the state of Wisconsin. So out of the 35 acres, there's about 9 acres worth of prairie grass. I didn't want to come in here, destroy everything. I did want to take little chunks of it and make it into kill plots. And so when I hunted, and I only hunted a couple times, I'd say probably about 10 times in 2023, because 2 weeks after we moved in, we ended up having our second child. So there was a lot of nights I wasn't getting sleep. We didn't have time. So my brother ended up hunting several times as well. I got out maybe 10 times, and that was including gun season. The biggest pain point that I noticed right away is I noticed a lot of deer would move it to other properties as soon as the snow hit or the frost hit. My property did not have any food except for the prairie grass. So And I saw it with my cameras and I saw it with my eyes. As soon as the snow hit, gone. But my property did produce a lot of pictures, a lot of deer, decent deer and some big ones within the first 4 to 6 weeks of the hunting season. Besides that, it really slowed down. So, also, the other pain point was they would burn inside the woods as well, like every single year. So, if you can
Mm,
imagine, it was very open. And
yeah.
so during the summer months, as of right now, these deer can disappear in my forest and you wouldn't see them. But as soon as that vegetation dropped or the leaves fell, it's completely wide open. And so that was the biggest pain point. I would say is just there was a lot of work to be done, and I just didn't know where to start.
Yeah. And
That's
so
why I
that
called Sam.
brings me I was going to say that brings me to kind of the next point is when did you decide to reach out to a consultant? So that, that I think becomes pretty obvious. Coming from the South, I hear you talking about burning and I'm like, let's talk burn rotations, but that's not why we're here. But that's one of our favorite, habitat management tools down here. But yearly does make it extremely, extremely tough to build high quality cover, especially in a northern climate. A lot of folks, burning is kind of sold as the fix all, but if you're burning every year, even down here in the South, you're going to struggle with high quality season long cover. And so if you start doing that up north, you're definitely going to get into that issue. Um, what are some of the goals that you were hoping to accomplish? And Sam, I think you can probably speak to this a little bit too, from some of your earlier conversations with Jordan. But what were some of the, I guess, specific goals you had in mind when you first reached out to Whitetail Partners?
So my biggest goal was to hold deer. I wanted mature deer, mature bucks, obviously. Um, I want them to be on my property 365 days a year. I know that's hard right away. It's a process. It takes several years to do that, especially with mine. I I have a lot of work, a lot of years ahead, or that I still have to work towards hitting that goal. But um, my biggest issue was as soon as gun season rolled around, there was no reason for these deer to be here. So I wanted to hold with cover. I wanted to hold it with food and be able to move around my property without scaring them. I made a lot of bad mistakes in the beginning. I didn't really know too well. I was like, oh, let me go right in the middle of the field to go down to this lower field. And with walking with Sam, I realized there was a lot more beds that were just looking right at my house and they could see me come right down the ravine. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I'm glad I called Sam because I would have never known that unless I really walked that part of the property.
Yeah, yeah. Sam, I'm curious when you first spoke with Jordan, and you guys were talking about goals and you're trying to take into account all of the relevant context to help, with the best design for him. What are some of the things that maybe stuck out about Jordan and his goals and maybe his property as well?
Yeah, yeah. So when I got the call, and first I start from way out and start zooming in, but from the way out, it was like, wow, this is in a fantastic area. The region that Jordan's in, with the topography, with the continuous timber between parcels, as he mentioned, uh, and the location that it's in, still having a lot of farm country around it. It's just a really awesome blend for habitat to have cover, yet have these fields. Having that, and then start to zoom in to the property itself and having that existing native grass prairie that he had, and being able to work with that, not working to eliminate it, but to use that as a complement and just add some details to it, as we did with the kill plots and some travel routes through it and things like that. It also helped interconnect to some adjacent timber too, because it was continuous cover. So that was a strong positive attribute. But being 35 acres, and having the access points that we did immediately need to look at access. Jordan talked about that, and usually that's one of our first priorities, is to say how many different ways can we get at this property. Thankfully, he had roadways on two sides of his property, which allowed us to get at it from different ways. And the um, initial thought of how do we do this, and changing that mindset to realize, hey, there's a lot of different ways we can get in on this. And one of the things I'm always excited about is when a landowner buys a piece of property and says, I haven't done anything yet, and that's
Yeah.
a big stopping point to say that's fantastic, because we're starting without, if we did a bunch of random improvements, it's difficult to take a step back sometimes to move forward. And we had a blank slate there, but had a lot of really fantastic things going. And like I said, the timber was pretty open, but it was a good blend of timber, size wise, maturity wise, that we could go after with saws and start to manipulate that habitat into something that would be a more productive cover.
Yeah, very, very good. Very, very good. So I'm curious, Jordan. Obviously, before you called Sam, there's a lot of homework that goes into that. And uh, I'm sure a lot of looking around, I'm sure a lot of digging, sure a lot of reading, sure a lot of watching and listening. What ultimately made you decide to go with Whitetail Partners and Sam as opposed to another group, another consultant?
Yeah, so that is a very good question. And I did a lot of homework. I watched a lot of videos. I quickly realized that I was not going to be able to do this by myself. And not necessarily the work, but the idea of what I want, right? And I didn't know where to start. And so I needed some help. What drew me into Whitetail Partners was looking on Sam's website where he explains what you get. The biggest thing that I've noticed with other habitat consultants is I was very confused on what I get. Okay, I get a plan, but what does it look like? What is, the communication between you guys and the landowner? What does that look like? And so having a clear picture really drew me into you guys. And I remember the night where I'm like, this is it. And it was the day before gun season ended, because I was frustrated. I was like, okay, I got to do something. And it was the day after gun season ended, pretty much, is when I called Sam. So that was the big difference, is the deliverables of understanding what I get from you guys versus somebody else.
All right. So, Jordan, walk me through the process then of working with Whitetail Partners. So, you reach out to Sam, obviously have that like initial conversation, but I'm curious about how things went from the on site consultation visit to the design and you getting your deliverables to follow up. I'm just curious about how all of that was for you, and maybe what you feel like, stood out.
Gotcha. Yeah. So when Sam originally came to that first review, I had my brother with me. We walked through the whole property. We kind of told him, "Hey, this is what we've noticed." And Sam was very vocal, or he was very transparent on exactly the time frame that we would get our design back. It was right before Christmas, so I had two Christmases this last year, and once we got the design, um, we had the communication back with Sam, and so he recorded a video with about an hour worth of explaining why we're doing why we're designing this a certain way. And from there, I gave him an email response back and had more questions for him. So ever since Sam and I have been talking, I've always had more questions. Just how I am. I just like to dig a little bit deeper on everything. So Sam has always written back to me, if it's email, if he's called me, if he's texted me, whatever. And so after that design process, we talked about the next step, which would be a habitat day. Because I'm one of those guys that, hey, I have this brand new property. I don't want to screw it up. I want him to flag every little travel corridor. I want him to mark every single tree to hinge cut. And so that was the kind of the process that we started. We got the design. We scheduled a habitat day. had him stop. I think he actually stopped over twice, just to verify some of my other questions that I had. And since then, I've been kind of rocking and rolling with that design, and still in communication with Sam. I even texted him a couple days ago too. So it's been a good journey, and I'm definitely glad that Sam's been there for me, because I would have never been where I have been today without Whitetail Partners.
Well, and it sounds like you have really gotten on the work as well. I mean, it sounds like you've made a lot of progress pretty quickly on your property. I want to hear about the work that you've done so far, and maybe what are some of the results that you're seeing.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that we have done, it was the travel corridors, and so we were able to kind of hinge all the trees, and it's some big travel corridors, and it's taken me months to kind of get perfected. We've done the install of all the water tanks. We've done the install of the mock scrapes. There are certain things that I couldn't do this year, like we couldn't create any edge feathering in some of the fields in that lower field of mine, because we actually had switchgrass installed. And one little note is I actually had one of Sam's guy install my kill plots this year in addition to the switchgrass. And so that one edge feathering concept won't happen until this following year, once it gets a little bit taller. But as of right now, the biggest effect that I see is the deer movement. I have cameras on this travel corridor. I have deer going down it every single day. And the one thing I did forget to mention is when I was hunting, these deer would come out of anywhere. They had room to go through every area. It was so inconsistent. Now, with being a hinge cut, they can only come through a couple little spots in the field, and we've manipulated that deer movement pretty significantly, which is going to be great during the hunting season. So we've done a lot of cutting trees, and yeah, I'm still sore from this spring at this point.
Well, good. You've got a little bit of time to rest now before you head into deer season. But Sam, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you have taken that deer movement from being so random on the property to being pretty dialed in, which does a lot of things for us. Not only does it improve our hunting and improve our inventory ability of getting pictures of the deer and figuring out what they're doing, but it makes a property more huntable because we can manage our pressure that much better if the deer movement is not totally random. So what were some of the things that you did in the design to capitalize on that? 'Cause I think that's one of the things people are probably going to take away from this episode and say, wow, if my deer movement on my property can be more consistent and predictable, that's what I want.
Right. And our focus here in the first season on that travel, we talk about this on our plan breakdown podcasts, where we are trying to isolate that opportunity of where the deer are coming through in these travel corridors. It starts, and a lot of times, with topography or other habitat features, saying where are the deer naturally traveling. So again, starting way out and zooming in, we want to say, how are they using the landscape to begin with? And then give them that preferred option, and then isolate it to be the only option. As Jordan talked about, and I mentioned it earlier with the open timber, deer could really move throughout, and there's great bedding opportunities within his timber, so they kind of freely filtered through that timber. We wanted to make those routes a lot more dedicated, and both through just cutting trees down and flush cuts as well as hinge cuts, we could isolate that. And then that combines in with our hunter access. So generally speaking, we want to have, deer travel from A to B, and we want to have our hunter access come in perpendicular from that, from a non-deer area on the outside. And that's exactly what we have, especially with those two roads of access coming in from the edge of the property to those hunting locations, and then being able to get at them that way. The other thing too, once we are done with all those cuttings, working towards isolating the locations for the stands, and that's picking the right tree stands. That's talking about adding mock scrapes at all those stand locations, as well as water holes at some of the best ones. And I think we have, what is it, 3 water holes, Jordan, on the property that we picked out, and
Yep.
making those the preferred routes and preferred locations. And then also within the plan, isolating those camera locations, which Jordan's been using, and seeing what we have out there now.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome to hear. So, Jordan, I'm curious, we're kind of winding things down now, but what advice would you give to the guy who's got, you know, 20 acres, 30 acres, 40 acres, something like that, and they want to take their hunting to the next level? Maybe they're experiencing some of the pain points of, deer movement through my property, totally inconsistent. Maybe they're experiencing, hey, you get to a certain point in the season, the deer seem like they're just gone. At least the bucks are gone from my property. What advice would you give to those people?
So my biggest advice is don't be ashamed to ask for help. I think
Yeah.
I think we get caught up with our ego sometimes. We're like, I can do this because, like, technically, I could do everything that you can do, right? I can cut a tree down, but I think having somebody with the idea and showing you why this is going to work and this is why we're doing this is very important. And so, somebody like me that is obsessed with deer hunting, there's not a day I don't think about deer. I think having additional help goes very far. And knowing, like, I didn't know many species of trees, right? And so Sam told me, this is what it is. This is what we're not going to hinge. This is what we're going to hinge. And I would have never known that, right? I mean, there's certain things that I had an idea. And Sam, I'm not sure if you remember this, but down this lower field, there was this very thick spot. I was going to clear it all out, make it food. I thought before calling Sam, I was like, I need food. I need food. Need food. This is what they need. Sam's like, no, you do not touch this area. This is the thickest part of your whole property. It was all, unused, like useless trees. And
Just
you're gonna,
scrubby trees.
Sam, you might have to
Box
remind me
elders
what
growing
type of tree
sideways
that
and all
was.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just box elders. Yeah. It was crazy because I remember spooking deer out of that when I was intruding into my property. And later, after we walked through, just seeing the evidence, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is one of the best areas. So I almost ruined it. So with that being said, don't be ashamed to ask for help. Do your research, do your homework, which I did. And I'm thankful that I was able to call Sam and have him come out, because just having that communication with Sam, I don't know if anybody else would be able to provide that like he has. I mean, there's probably been times where I've annoyed him. He might not admit it on this podcast, but
No, I like to have
it's
active
gone
clients
very
asking
far.
good questions.
That's right. Yeah. The more
and
the more a
just,
client is asking, the better.
Yeah, and this is only the first year. I do plan on continuing having that relationship with Whitetail Partners, and I can't imagine what it's going to look like in a couple of years, because everything's incremental each year. I'm not going to have a turnkey property this year. It's going to take several years, and every year we're going to improve it, and hopefully down the road, my 2 daughters can enjoy that property because of Whitetail Partners. I would have never been where I'm at right now without you guys.
Well, that's awesome. So I'm curious then, you just mentioned it's only been a year. We're heading into year 2 right now. I want to hear what's next for you. What work do you have left to do? What improvements do you have left to implement? And, what are your plans moving forward?
Yeah, so the couple other things that need to be improved is my kill plots. We've got them drilled in right now, just kind of waiting for that to kind of come up. The next thing that I've done is I've already planned a 2024 review with Sam in the winter time, to kind of go through things that worked and things that didn't work. Because as of right now, I can tell you with just reviewing my cameras, things are working. But as you know, things will change throughout the hunting season, and yeah, so it's always going to be a little chess game with these deer. So having him planned for this following year is going to be definitely beneficial for me. I've also talked with him on another habitat day in 2025. Again, there's going to be things that I want his eyes on versus me just guessing, hey, this is how Sam um, proposed it, right? So that is what's going to be upcoming in this following year, in addition to all these other improvements that he's going to suggest. Because again, like I said before, it's not turnkey. It will never be turnkey that first year. It's always going to be evolving.
Right. Very good. Well, Jordan, Sam, thank you guys so much for joining us for the podcast today. Jordan, especially you coming on here and sharing your experience working with Whitetail Partner, your experience implementing the plan. Best of luck to you this year. I am very excited to see, and I'm sure if you send Sam some pictures of the bucks you've got, hopefully he'll forward them our direction. But Jordan, thank you so much. I appreciate your time today.
Definitely. Well, thank you for
Jordan.
having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.